This is a banknote from Senegal. Here is another from Congo. They look nothing like each other, yet they are part of the same scheme, a scheme that pegs both currencies to the euro, a rate determined by the French treasury. The issue at stake is the apex of French policymaking, the CFA franc. Using it, France controls the monetary sovereignty of 14 nations, making up nearly 200 million people. These countries include Benin, Burkina Faso, Cameroon, Chad, Congo, Equatorial Guinea, Gabon, Guinea-Bissau, Ivory Coast, Mali, Niger, Senegal, Togo, and the Central African Republic. And while these nations have a seat at the United Nations and wave their independent flags, it is only the face of imperialism that has changed. The conduct of business has largely remained the same. The big difference is that imperialism used to be spread through tanks. Nowadays, it comes through banks. The most effective forms of control are those that are invisible. Recognizing this, in 1958, France hijacked authentic decolonization by installing local collaborators and granting them statehood. These collaborators became the custodians of France's neo-colonial empire by maintaining the franc zone and French military bases. Only Guinea turned down the offer. Its leader, Sékou Touré, declared that his people preferred being poor in freedom than rich in slavery. Guinea thus rejected the CFA franc, seeking to develop its own currency. France felt it needed to make an example of Guinea, so it cut pensions to war veterans, dismantled Guinea's power grid, and then attempted to block its UN membership. France went as far as to induce hyperinflation by flooding the country with counterfeit bills, all the while funding armed anti-government resistance. Yeah, it got pretty crazy. The plan ultimately failed to dislodge Sékou Touré, but Guinea's economy never fully recovered. Likewise, when Togo had a change of heart and sought to ditch the CFA franc, France made another example, this time without loose ends. Togo's leader, Sylvanus Olympio, was assassinated in January 1963. French involvement is suspected, but official records remain conveniently closed. Of itself, further attempts to conceal French imperialism followed. The CFA franc was split into two currencies covering the Central and West African states. By the mid-1970s, their respective central banks were Africanized and moved to Yaoundé and Dakar. Though local Africans staffed these institutions, there were no fundamental policy changes, and France retained veto power over the banks' governing statutes. This included a requirement that member states deposit half their exchange reserves at the French treasury, plus another 20% for financial liabilities, meaning member states retained access only to 30% of their money. Moreover, all foreign exchange conversions were to pass through the French treasury. The way this fiscal policy works is by operations accounts. These are special accounts held at the French treasury. The denominations are in euros, but when accounts are in credit, the African central banks effectively place their foreign exchange reserves at France's disposal. But when the central banks' accounts are in debit, they are obligated to pay interest to the French treasury. In other words, CFA member states pay France to hold on to their money. Even more unsettling, no one knows what France does with the money. The French treasury does not disclose this information even to CFA franc nations. So it wouldn't be out of the ordinary if France were to reinvest African funding for French profit. However, one looks at it, the CFA scheme is an effective moneymaker for France, and French businesses benefit as much as the French treasury. More specifically, France doesn't need to draw on its foreign exchange reserves for African imports. Dozens of French multinationals are present in Africa, including Total Energies, Areva, and Vinci. Africa also grants France access to strategic resources like uranium, which is indispensable for France's nuclear energy sector, meeting 3/4 of French energy needs. Meanwhile, Gabon is a source of crude oil, Mauritania delivers iron ore, while Togo and Benin provide agricultural commodities. Additionally, the icing on the cake, French national Vincent Bolloré owns most of West Africa's major ports. It is thus not by incident that former French President Jacques Chirac once stated that much of the money in French banks comes precisely from exploiting Africa, and that France would lose its global standing without its African empire. To preserve its hegemony, France has intervened militarily on the continent 40 times since the 1960s, from propping up corrupt dictators to conducting military operations in the Sahel. Moreover,